Hello and welcome back to another installment of Angle Up Producers Summer Camp Series, where we are re-releasing past episodes that speak to what makes an exceptional producer to help you build out your producer skill set. Tune in each week to unlock a new lesson from our roster of veteran industry camp counselors who have seen it all and done it all. If you're new here, my name is Judalina and I am the host of Angle on Producers, the show that takes you behind the scenes and into the shoes of producers across all corners of the entertainment industry. Thanks for being here. Climb on board as your counselor this week is Judalina Neira, and she's here to teach us all about how to wade through the waters of making a career in the arts. It can be easy to get lost in the sea of the entertainment industry without any buoys or paddles, and definitely not a lot of clear markers as to how to build a career. How does one chart the choppy waters and make it to the other side? Is it better to be a jack of all trades or master of none? Judalina is the writer-producer of hit shows including The Boys, Daisy Jones and the Six, The Flash, and more. She's been a producer on The Morning Show and Gen V and still finds time to be a community organizer and someone who enjoys her many hobbies. She's also a dear friend. But she made sure to tell us before all of her success that she waited tables for a chunk of a decade. What sets her apart is that she just made it like Dory and just kept swimming, writing during the day, serving at night, taking any opportunity that she could in between. All these years later, and we'd say she's found her stride and learned how to weather the storm. So grab your goggles and your flippers and please welcome writer, producer, and all-around fabulous multi-hyphenate Judalina Neira into your ears. Hey, and here we are. You're here on my screen. I'm so excited.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God, this is such a treat. Like I tell everyone when I start the show that I'm really intentional about who I bring on, and for the listeners, having you on is so special because our journey goes back so far to the very earliest stages. In fact, I was like in my email this morning being like, when was our first like email exchange? And it's like all the way dating back to 2011, you know? So, and you were obviously out here way before that, and I think we intersected before then, but that's just like when the first emails kind of started. So, you know, having been watching from the sidelines, just your ascension into this business and how you're kicking ass now, and you've been kicking ass, but now like you're getting articles written about you is the only difference. I'm just so proud. I'm just like proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it's crazy to think that I've been doing this now for, I have my WGA certificate on the board, officially a WGA member for 11 years now because I joined in 2013. And yet like 11 years into my career as a writer producer, like now I'm starting to take off. Like now is when it feels like my career is getting all the momentum. It's just bananas to think.
But does it feel that, or is it just perception? Like now is when you're getting, you know, the kinds of deals or the nominations or the stuff that's more outward facing?
It's a little bit of both because for sure, I mean, it's all rolled in together,
Yeah.
right? The nominations and the press and that starts to then feed the narrative, which then brings in better opportunities for you, like more high profile IP, you know, interesting collaborations. So it does, like, you know, work begets work in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we take it back to the very humble beginnings of your journey, I just want to read this little blurb from a Deadline article that just came out on you a few weeks ago, just to make you embarrassed, but it's fine. Writer-producer Judalina Neira, The Boys, Daisy Jones and the Six, has signed an overall deal with Sony Pictures Televisions focused on developing drama series for cable and streaming through her newly launched production company, Famous Last Words Productions. For her first project under the pact, Neira is taking on the signature Sony title, Bewitched. And I'm sure like you've read this because it's come out a couple of weeks ago. You read this, you know, article, but like when I read this, it just is like unbelievable. And I'm so impressed and I'm so proud. And when you hear these words, like, how does it make you feel?
Thank you. I mean, I think this goes back to what you were saying earlier about the outward facing versus the inward facing, because, you know, obviously I'm very proud. And yet also this is a classic, like hurry up and wait, because I started developing Bewitched literally a year ago. And given there was the strike and those complications led to the timeline of it. But like,
Yeah.
you know, it's to sit down with the producers who have the rights, who are fabulous. And it's been a great pleasure to work with them on this. It was a year ago. And my overall deal with Sony, also, we were started negotiating it a year ago. And then it started in November. So this deal has been, you know, a couple months underway.
Yeah.
But it's just now that it all starts to like roll out in this big press release
Yeah.
that everyone sees it. But for like my close friends and a lot of people who are in my inner circle, like it's like, if you know, they all do.
Yeah, exactly. But it's nice, it's nice to have like the everyone is now aware, and they're all the people we talked about this coming out of the woodworks that were not our favorite people throughout the up comments coming out of the woodwork to be like, oh, which is always the funny part of what we do. But yeah, I think like yes, you've been in this and but for me as someone who like just is like getting up to speed on everything you've been up to, it is just so incredible and inspiring, given like I know how hard you've worked to get here. And while it feels like 11 years, it's like you're still just getting started and it's finally taking off. Like I know how much goes on behind the scenes so that someone one day writes a cool little paragraph like that about you in the trades. So on that note, I want to bring us all the way back to the very humble beginnings of your journey. What was it that made you feel compelled to become a storyteller, your journey to LA, and then to eventually becoming a writer?
So I always talk about, I come from a military family. I'm 100% Latino. My parents are like from the Bronx, like from the projects. I was born on a military base in Virginia and I moved all around the US. And so when I talk about like my calling to create, I really think of myself as like a communicator, even more so than a storyteller, because I come from a place of just deep curiosity about all the humans that are in the world and all the humans that I've encountered as I've like moved around a bunch. Like many times not by my choice. I didn't have a say about where I was going or who I was going to meet or the people I was going to encounter there. And so in some ways, like I had to have a curiosity. And then once you meet all these different people and these strangers with all these like weird, wild, exciting stories, like how do you not channel that and put that into some form? And at the beginning for me, it was like bad poetry and journaling. I thought I was going to be, look, if this was like the 1600s or 1800s, I probably would be a poet and just like a tortured, brooding poet. But, we live in the modern era of television and film and podcasts. And I had like a whole sidebar life where I worked in the music industry before I like transitioned back into TV. And as soon as I started to like focus on television and really just channeling all those people that I had experienced over the course of my life, it all just clicked and started to pop off.
Yeah, but you also had a stint as an actor because when we met, we were both still acting, and I'm always, I think like the when you understand character, when you are curious about character through the lens of a performer, it absolutely informs the way you approach writing, and I actually think it makes you not further ahead, but you just have a deeper understanding of circumstances and wants and motivation and all of that stuff that is so important to carry any project. So what was the impetus for you to make that transition so distinctly?
Yeah. So I went to Emerson in Boston. I studied creative writing. I got my BFA in poetry. And I transitioned into the music industry. I just had a lot of connections. I had been interning and doing college music marketing, and I was living in New York City. I moved out to LA and I was still working in music when the music industry collapsed. And in a lot of ways, like kind of the seismic shifts we're going through now remind me of the seismic shifts of the music industry at that time. And there is a contraction that's currently happening that happened then too. And at that time, like rather than tough it out, I was like, you know what? I'm going to pursue these other interests I have. And I'd always been interested in theater and TV and film and radio and all these different like expressive forms. And I had a friend who was an actor musician, and he's like, you've got a good look. You should be an actress. And I was like, great, let me try it. I got a commercial agent within a couple months, like not even months, weeks. I had a commercial agent. And then for the next like 5 to 7 years, I was waiting tables. And I just think it's really important to underscore to people, I waited tables. I waited tables everywhere in LA. If you have been to a store in LA, I probably worked there. And at the time, like it was really grindy and soul sucking and saddening in some ways, but it was also like an amazing way for me to network and meet a ton of people, a lot of whom I'm still very close with. And it gave me the flexibility to just have time, which I think as a creative is like the hardest thing to come by. So I would work, these 4 or 5 hour shifts at night and make enough to pay my bills. And then I would have all day long to like noodle about or take improv class or take acting class or write my web series. And so a lot of the work that I was doing as an actor was like trying to find roles for myself, creating roles and voices for myself. And that's what kind of led me back into writing vis-a-vis screenwriting. Once I started writing material for myself to act in, then people were like, oh, can you write material for other people to act in? And it all just took off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually part of how we intersected. I was like doing a similar thing, but instead of me at the time investing in myself as a writer because I was like nervous and I don't know, I had put writing on such a pedestal because I thought like you had to be God's gift to the craft to make it in this town. And now I don't think that. but but at the time I was like, oh, who am I to like think I could just come and like put words on paper? And so anyway, so I was always seeking impressive women, especially who were writing, that we could like collaborate. And when I was pivoting also from acting to producing and creating roles for myself, I always felt at the time like my backdoor entrance into acting was always going to be through producing and having control over my destiny instead of sitting around and waiting to be someone's cup of tea. And so, you actually did act in a few things that you wrote and produced. But what was like the moment where you were like, all right, like I'm kind of done with that and I really want to now double down and I see a path for myself as a writer. And to talk about the fact that you're self-taught, which I think is super important. You learned everything by doing. So talk about some of the resources that you use and that transition.
Yeah. So I will say, I studied playwriting a little bit in college. I just like it didn't the form for whatever reason just didn't stick with me. So I had like a little bit of a background in, dialogue driven, character voice writing. But you're right. I self-taught myself how to write screenplays primarily off the internet. I mean, I just went on Twitter, I went on Google. At the beginning, before Twitter X now was Psycho. It was a really great community where you could just go in
Yeah.
there and connect with other people. And I found a community of writers and a community of actors who were all, had such great hustle and were initiating their own projects. And, I would ask, what should I read? Read Save the Cat, what books, and I downloaded dozens and dozens and dozens of scripts, and I just voraciously read scripts. And my earliest scripts, I would have, and I still do this sometimes, one script in the background while I have final draft in the front. And I would just like reference it. Okay, how do they format their slug lines? How do they come in and out of scenes? How do they do dual dialogue? How do they handle their visual transitions? And just using the scripts that I had read as, models for my own writing. The script that got me staffed on the Flash was inspired, like, I don't want to say it's a mashup because it's completely different content wise, but it was tonally Salem meets Sleepy Hollow. And I had these two scripts in the background. And by the way, both of those scripts are exquisitely written. The Salem script is creepy as hell and scary as hell. And the Sleepy Hollow script, just the way the action moves and their description of the action is just like pops off the page and just carries you through it. And so those were inspiration touchstones that I used as I was writing my own pilot.
You told me the other day, which I thought was such a great like in the filmed version of your life story that we're gonna get one day. There's a scene in it where it's Judalina sitting. I don't know why the thing did a thumbs up. It's gonna be a scene of Judalina on Christmas Day at a bar writing what became like this first sample of yours that has gone on to really launch you. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, so this is a little bit of the transition into how I became, how I became official at writing. There's this program called the National Hispanic Media Coalition's Script to Screen Fellowship, and through my just like random researching on the internet, I found out about this program, and they select, I think, 8 to 10 writers each year, and it's just this like intensive training program where they put you, they have you write new material, they put you in a writer's room style room. And so I applied and I was really fortunate to get in. And that was kind of my first like big break into the industry. And that was the pivot point for me, to go back to your last question, because I was making a decent living as an on-camera host. I was doing red carpet interviews, I was doing live events. Like that was starting to take off. And then I got into this fellowship and it just seemed like this really clear pivot. And for me, I was like, okay, when I'm 55, do I still want to have to be worrying about doing my hair and makeup every day and going to the gym 15 times a week in order to keep a certain physical image? Or I can pursue screenwriting and I can have control over like the stories that I'm putting out into the world and have a career path that maybe is going to have some more longevity for me. And so I chose and ended up following the screenwriting, which ended up being the right thing. So that program, the man who runs that, who is the mentor for that program, Jeff Harris, I became quite friendly with him, and he did a spin-off class where he was basically, was pilot writing. I joined that class, and in that class, I was writing this script that has become my like calling card script to this day. And yeah, like you were saying, it was a script where like over one bleak, sad Christmas break, like no one was in LA. I was like still waiting tables and like barely making ends meet. I had just spent Christmas with my family who were local, but like was back here in my sad apartment and didn't know what to do with myself. And I went and sat at a bar and I wrote like the most tragic, heart-wrenching scenes from this script. And all the emotion that obviously just came out of that kind of sad, messy, bleak place went right into the material, and that ended up being the script that people have responded to the most so far.
Amazing. And so then the first thing that you get after these programs, your first staffing job then was The Flash?
No, my first staffing job was on a fabulous little soap called Hit the Floor on VH1.
Oh my God, yes, I remember
Yes, you
this.
remember?
This
Oh my God,
chapter, yes, of
so good.
Judalina.
If you guys haven't seen Hit the Floor, I highly recommend you go hunt it down and watch it. It is so fun and frothy. It's like a nasty soap opera set in a fictional NBA world, and it follows the dance squad, the cheerleaders essentially of this fictional NBA squad. And it was very smutty, like sexy and soapy and just and super diverse, like heavily black cast, Latino, like really diverse, and a tiny room with the best writers who I'm still very close with. And I was so fortunate to start with people who were so patient with me when I was just like overeager and impetuous and like didn't know what I didn't know, and who also taught me the ropes and gave me a lot of room to run because I wanted to. I wanted to just go, you know.
Yeah. A good question, given that you write across various genres, especially there's a lot of the hybrids nowadays, but at the time when you were starting out, I think it was still pretty separate. You know, you were a drama writer or you were a comedy writer. There was very few people that kind of did both. Was it intentional on your part to set out to be a drama writer? And what was it about these scripts and working within this kind of tone that you felt was like, or maybe it wasn't intentional, it just kind of happened, that you felt like this is where I really want to invest my time versus going more the comedy route? Because I know now you've worked across all the spectrum of different types. And I think for the listeners, if somebody is a writer and they're kind of wanting to break in, there's always this idea of like, what do you focus on? But how do you not get stuck in a box, right? As a writer or as any creator. So was that an intentional part of that chapter?
I love this question because it is such a testament to how much has changed since I started. When I
Yeah.
started, by the way, I started off as a comedy writer. My first scripts, I wrote a community spec, I wrote half hours, and then slowly I was starting to dabble in a lot of YA, so that like hour longs. I wrote a Pretty Little Liars spec back when specs were the thing. And then my pilot was an hour long, but very dark dramedy, like has a lot of humor. Everything I write has a lot of dark humor to it. And at the time, it was really challenging because we were in the Breaking Bad era, right? So shows were, you wrote dark, serious dramas or you wrote comedies, and agents and managers were very strict about you are one or the other. There's no in between. And there were only a very small handful of shows that kind of were in that middle ground. Those were the Nurse Jackies, like those kind of what we call nowadays traumedies,
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
half-hour dramas or you know the dark comedies. There were only a couple of those, and so it's like there weren't a lot of jobs in that space. And so at the beginning it was hard for me. It was really hard for me to find work. And in some ways you can kind of align the success that I've had over the past like 5 to 6 years with the massive tonal shifts of the industry, where now all of a sudden everything's a dramedy, everything is marrying or mashing up all these different genres. And the fact that I have worked in soap and I have worked in superheroes, and I have worked in like rated R, genre pieces, and I have worked in political dramedies. Like it gives me a wider range to be able to kind of blend and marry a bunch of different pieces. It's what
Yeah.
Sony they like about me because they're like, great, we know you can do, our badass female driven pieces, but we also know you're going to do our genre and you're down to do soap and YA.
It's so fascinating that like that versatility now is what got you this deal. It's what gets you, in this place that you're at. But certainly when you were starting, I'm sure there were a lot of questions and doubts of like, oh my gosh, am I investing in the right thing? Like many of us have. But I talk so much on the show about like leaning into what you have and to where you are, because you never know where that's going to take you. And I similarly had, I spent so much time like playing in many sandboxes as a producer intentionally, because it would be boring for me to be stuck just doing docs or just doing features. Like I liked the sprint versus the marathon of branded and commercials. And for a long time, people said, well, what are you? We don't know how to categorize you because this town is obsessed with categorizing people. And I get that it's because there's such a volume of people, especially new people that are coming in, that you need to have some sense of like how to think of someone, right? And we all want to be thought of. But it's interesting to me that 10 years later, when I started conversations about going in-house to work with Issa Rae, that was the thing that made me an attractive candidate. You know, the fact that I had all this random ass experience, and because she's so versatile in the business she was building, made me sort of like a shoe-in for this role that I never would have conceived. And so I always tell people who are listening, like, just to kind of follow your intuitions, as cheesy as that sounds, and invest in the things that kind of like feel really good to you, and not to take everything that the noise from the business too seriously, because you just don't know how what you're building today shapes you up and sets you up for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I did spend a lot of time, and I still do spend a lot of time thinking about myself as, I think of myself both as as a CEO, as a CEO of Judalina Corp, now the president of Famous Last Words Productions. But I also think of myself as like, what is the brand of my own product, of Judalina the writer, Judalina the voice? And, I do spend a lot of time thinking about the through line. It's okay for me to live on a spectrum of versatility, but then what is the central through line of all of those elements? And I'm constantly adjusting that and honing that to like be able to articulate it in meetings, because people do want to know. And if you can't just say,
Yeah.
oh, I do everything, they do kind of want to know,
Yeah.
sure. But like, when I have 15 pieces of IP that come across my desk, which two are you going to get excited about, so that I don't have to spend time emailing you about all 15,
Exactly.
And so for me, that through line
Yeah.
is this idea of delight with bite. It's female forward stories that have a dark edge to it, that have some humor, that have a touch of genre in them. That's my specialty.
Yeah. And I'm sure it took you a while to like craft that very simple way of explaining it. But without all of the backstory, you can't get to like the simplicity of what that communicates so clearly and so effectively. And I feel similarly, where it's like the through line for me is at the core of everything I've ever done, unless it was early days and it was just for money, which no shade, no tea, like that happens. We need that.
Yeah.
Really positions women front and center, whether it's in the stories that we're telling or the creatives that we're empowering. Like that, to me, it's women and people of color have to be at the forefront of what I'm doing on screen, behind the scenes. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, that is what my through line is. And in whatever format or medium, that's kind of where I want to play and where I want to put my energies and my talents, And that took time to become clear as well, because sometimes you're just going through the motions, and oftentimes you don't have the luxury early on to make these decisions. You have to just go where the jobs are. You have to go where the lessons are, the opportunities, and then take all of that once you reach a certain point, which is different for everybody, and then be able to zoom out and go, okay, like, here's everything I've gotten to do now. What does this say about who I'm trying to be in this business? Does that matter to me? Or am I just want to take jobs because of money? Like, whatever your truth is, I think that's all fair and fine, as long as you know what that is for you.
And this industry it is such a grind, and it can be so soul sucking. And I don't want to be at all. And in fact, I want to position it as I've gotten further along. Working with good people has become more of a priority to me than what I work on. And that's not to be dismissive of the material, because I've worked on a lot of things that I'm extremely passionate about. And the best jobs are always like the ones that intersect with both material I'm really excited about, with people who I adore.
Yeah.
But I will
Yeah.
always take people over good material, period, every day of the week.
Yeah, no, same. And I think it takes a lot of being beaten down by this business and still being here and weathering all the storms to be like, that is the non-negotiable now. I feel very similarly, especially in light of the year we had last year with the strikes and coming off of the pandemic, and now being in this weird market contraction place of corporate greed and all the things that are happening, and we're still not in the clear. I think it's been sort of clear more than ever to most people that I know and talk to, this exact thing of like, it just isn't worth it if you're not on the journey with good people that you vibe with, that are at your energy level. And it takes time to find those people. And when you're starting out, like, unless you come in and you're like yanked and put into a community where that you're already going to fit in and belong, which happens to some people but not everybody, it can take years of being in the wrong environments, and weathering that to really find what makes all of this sort of worth it in the long run. So yeah, obviously you have found it, and so it's great. So you have your first TV job, and then take us through to where you get to today. And then I want to dissect like writing and producing in television and how that all functions.
So post Hit the Floor, I was with them for 2 years, and then I couldn't get a job to save my life, and so I went and sold a pilot. And it sounds a lot easier than it was with
Yeah.
Christina Aguilera at NBC. That's a whole separate podcast we could do, just talking about my first sale and
Oh my
development,
God.
which
We will do
like
this. This will be a sidebar
yeah,
Patreon exclusive.
sidebar Patreon exclusive, just all
Yes.
about how hard it is to sell and how easy it was for me the first time to sell, that then made me think, oh, this is always going to be this easy. It's
Yeah.
not. It's really, really hard. And then after that, I joined The Flash. And The Flash was my boot camp in television. I cannot recommend enough, if you have the opportunity to work on a broadcast show, to work on like a 22 episode show, you're just never going to learn television the way you do on a broadcast show. And it's just very good experience. I was with them for 3 years, 68 episodes,
Jeez.
produced like 13 of them. It's just bonkers. It's bonkers. That poster there is my Flash poster that I will never take down, because it reminds me of the best times and also the turmoil times of the making of television, and how freaking hard it can be and how you can always persevere. So after that, that feels like it was just a minute ago, because I came off the show in 2019, and really shortly after landed on Daisy Jones and the Six, which is my dream job.
Yeah.
Since Daisy Jones, again, I wrote on Daisy Jones and the Six in 2019. Daisy Jones just came out last year. Like, just the craziness of the past 5 years and everything with the pandemic and how productions got so like distorted and disrupted. It feels like I just wrote that show yesterday, even though now it's
Yeah.
been 5 years. And so that was that. And then fast forward, I've been really fortunate to work on a bunch of different shows since, mostly staffing and waiting for them to kind of catch up with production to actually come out. And so it was a weird scenario where this last year, for the past 5 years, nothing I'd written on had come out. And then in this past year, three things came out that I wrote on, and a fourth is coming out this summer. So the Boys season 4, which I just worked on, is going to be coming out. Morning Show, which I consulted on, their new season came out. Gen V, which I worked on a couple years ago, that came out. And then obviously Daisy Jones finally came out and has been, sweeping up
Yeah.
a bunch of nominations everywhere.
Well deserved. But yeah, it's that thing of like the perception and smoke and mirrors of Hollywood, right? What we from the outside, someone can go, "Oh my God, like Judalina's just everywhere. She's just been like writing around the clock." And it's like, well, no, this has been 5 years of doing the work, and then because of things you can't control, all of them coming out at this time, and it feeling like this condensed timeline, but it's been this slow, steady, consistent progress behind the scenes. So talk a little bit about, so I've never worked in traditional television. I've worked on the days of digital series, when I don't know why it keeps doing this thumbs up thing. It's so
If
annoying.
you make a thumbs up, even accidentally,
I know, but
it
I
is my
gesticulate. I'm Italian, I'm Latina. Like we need a Zoom that's like Latina friendly, because I cannot
yeah.
with the thumbs up and all the fireworks going off. But no, like I've never really worked in traditional television. When I started really doing the podcast and dissecting, well, what does a producer do? I obviously came up on the independent side. It was so fascinating to me that, okay, in the world of television, the writer is king. And as you escalate the different titles in a show, you eventually become essentially just a producer. But there's always some element of writing. And so if you could please distill for us just like the whole hierarchy, how it works, and when someone is breaking into TV, what is their North Star? Is it to be a showrunner? Is it some other kind of producer?
So there are like official rankings for television writers, and you start off literally at the entry level. It's called a staff writer. That's your entry level position. And then you have story editor, executive story editor, co-pro, producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, and then executive producer. So those are the titles. Now, the bananas thing about television is that depending on the show that you're working on, you can be the highest level title and have the exact same job as the staff writer, like depending on your show. So, like, for example, on The Flash, we were, that's a show that just you have to turn out episode after episode. You're on tight deadlines. You're writing as you're shooting. Like, everything's happening in real time. You don't have the kind of ramp up room that you would have like on a streaming show, where you would have the luxury to write all the episodes in advance. And so for that show, it's like all hands on deck. If you are a newbie writer, like, you're coming in, you're breaking story aggressively and quickly. Everyone who's there in that room needs to contribute and heavily. And when there was opportunity to, you went to set, and a lot of times you would get sent into set without any experience, and they're just like, go, just make sure things aren't on fire, report back. There was a lot of on the job training at that job. Now, in an ideal situation, you would have a little bit more mentorship, I would say. And it's just hard. A lot of shows don't have the money, they don't have the time, and they don't have like the support system from the studios and the networks to be able to implement a full mentorship program to train young writers on how to produce. So, what you're finding nowadays, unfortunately, is that a lot of writers on streaming shows don't get to go to set at all. They never get any set experience. And it is so important to like experience what it means to be on set, to do revisions on the fly, to look at the thing that you've written and to see how, for whatever reason, it's not producible, and to keep that in the back of your head so that when you're writing material in the future, you're writing scripts that are producible, or issues you've had to navigate previously so you don't fall back into those same traps over and over again. And now this was one of the big fights that came up in the strike this year, which, was this push to be like, showrunners need support from other writer producers because they can't be responsible for being the sole person who's on set for every single day of the week, being there, making sure that everything looks right and supporting the cast and supporting the directors and giving the creative intention behind the material, while also needing to rewrite all of these scripts as you're going through the production process. Because for those of you who are listening, like, you'll write something and you'll be like, they're swimming in the ocean. And then you're shooting it in like rural, Canada, and you're like, we don't have an ocean. So now you need to rewrite the whole scene. Where can it be shot instead? How can we do it on a more affordable budget? Or, a perfect example, has been happening a lot. Your number one on the call sheet just came down with COVID today. How can you rewrite these scenes so you can cut this person out, or so that you can shoot around them and be more economical about the way you're shooting out the rest of the actors so that you can pick these scenes back up later when your number one clears, negative? Whatever it is. So these are the kinds of challenges that are just happening on the fly that you need a writer there for, because they have to literally put words to paper to update the pages so that production can see what they're implementing on screen.
Yeah. And I think how traditionally television seemed to work is that the higher you are in this level as an EP, the more experience you have, and thus the new writers are seeing this, they're learning from each other, and you're simultaneously training people to kind of come up and rise the ranks, which I know in so many of panels I've gone to in conversations around specifically with Latino writers and the writers from marginalized communities, what often happens is that they get stuck at the mid-level and they can't rise up, whether there's now less jobs for them or they're in that weird place where they're like too qualified but not qualified, or they have done 10 years of the same job but they haven't gotten the opportunity to be on set. So then the people are like, well, and so they get stuck in these rungs of the ladder. But do you think that now in this model where it is a little more, it sounds like every show you can have a title but it doesn't necessarily indicate the level of experience that you're bringing to the table, is that really doing a disservice to how we're modeling and training the next generation of writer producers?
I think so. And again, like, to come back to the most recent strike, that was one of the sticking points that was being fought, just, supporting showrunners so that they can have writer producer help on set, ensuring that they are legally or contractually now entitled to have at least 2 writers on set with them throughout production to support them through that process. And also as a learning opportunity, because that can be split up to, I say 2 writers, but the new terms allow that to be split up however you want. So you could send your 8 writers, for each episode, however you want to divvy up the money. But anyway, this is all a way to say that, we all need this training. It's required, it's necessary. And then you've been seeing a lot of is, showrunners who don't have production backgrounds and don't have production experience being given big budget streaming shows. And without that kind of training, it can go off the rails really quickly. Yeah. And so it costs studios and the networks more in the long run to not just invest in the training in the early days, right? Yeah. Like, train people young when it's cheap so that then when they are in leadership roles, they know what they're doing and it costs you less, in mistakes and cleanups. So
it's always boggled my mind for such a risk-averse industry how they don't invest in mitigating the risk on the early days on the front end, because every position really for the most part, you learn on the job. Like, and the way I came up as well, it's very much the case. And I've never understood why you would just hand over someone millions and millions of dollars. There's all this care and precaution and red tape and all these conversations leading up to getting you into the production phase, which is the most expensive phase of any project. And then it's like once you get there, they're like, just whatever, they just kind of like lift their hands up. But what concerns me deeply is that the more that we have this situation happen, which is a true side effect of decisions that the top decision makers are making, the less we see shows getting greenlit, the less money is going to keep getting spent, the more we're going to have more and more contraction, and thus there's less opportunities for people to even get in, break in, rise the ranks, do everything. And so it's this really interesting cycle that's unfortunate that is inherently created by the decision makers, and it just kind of boggles my mind of like why you wouldn't invest in the future of this business. Would you say there is an inherent difference then between writing and producing in the TV space, or are you just expected that from the jump you have to kind of be thinking producerially?
I think it just, again, it kind of depends. It's show by show. In some ways, I think writing is producing because every element of it, you're thinking about casting, you're thinking about roles, you're thinking, I mean, everything you put on the page has a producerial point of view from it. You're already thinking about what locations, if you know you're going to shoot in a specific city, you're already thinking about the types of locations you'll have access to, and you're writing to that or away from that. But I will say, the higher you rise up through the ranks and the more leadership you have on a show, the more producerial you're going to be. And by the way, for television, the showrunner is king or queen. They're the head executive producer. They make the primary decisions, but they also work in tandem with line producers, and very frequently there will be non-writing producers as well who are going to weigh in both creatively and from a production point of view. I have some fabulous non-writing producers on Bewitched who are incredibly experienced, and it's great to have those kinds of partnerships because they have the lens for the marketplace. They understand how to work with Sony. They've produced television and film projects before. They understand budgeting and arenas. They've done it multiple times. Whereas some of those areas I'm still learning. I know how to run a writer's room. I've been in the writer's room in and out. I know how to collaborate with other writers. I know how to solve story problems on the page. So, we have our areas of expertise. And then like a transformer robot, you like team up and like combine forces for good. So I love working with other producers. Your line producer on your television show, they are a godsend. They are sadly frequently the most suffering person on the show. They just hours on the grind are long, but they're going to save your butt again and again and again. If you have the great pleasure to get to go to set, thank your line producer, give them some flowers or booze, depending on which way they lean.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. A lot of people who've come on the show are line producers, and we know that they are the unsung heroes. We are the unsung heroes of the industry. A lot of invisible work behind the scenes that when things are moving and shaking and it's well oiled, no one notices. But the minute something is out of sync, everything falls. Everybody just hands are up in arms, and that's the first person to get blamed or thrown under the bus. And so it is a very challenging job to do, not just the job itself, but then the emotional aspect of dealing with, you're getting everyone's problems dumped on you all day long, and you have to solve them. And there's something very exciting about that. But on a human level, it's important that producers who are listening, and anyone who's worked with a line producer, checks in on their line producer, sees if they need anything. Like perhaps just like a Starbucks Frappuccino would make their day. There are these little things you can do for someone on a human level that can just really make them feel taken care of. And they spend all their time caring for everyone else. And I don't see frequently people who have not done this path come up to them and see how they can support them in these, again, small, tiny ways that just help them feel taken care of. So I encourage anyone listening who hasn't ever thought to do this for their fellow line producer at any stage.
And as a writer producer, I think it can also be very important at the earliest stage when you arrive on set. You're coming in, depending on what episode number you are. Like for example, this last year on The Boys, I had episode 5, which is like right in the middle of the grind of the season, right? You're not far enough along where you see the finish line and you've been doing it for a few months. You're kind of like right in the grindiest part of it. to come in and to ask, like, what are some challenges you guys are grappling with? How can I be helpful? What are opportunities with this current script? What are
Opportunities.
where are some areas that I can brainstorm to be helpful as you guys are looking at the schedule and the budget? Just what are your concerns so that I can brainstorm on it? And the thing that I love about producing on set, even though the hours are such a grind, like, oh my gosh, God bless every crew member and person who works, physical production.
Yeah.
It's toil on the body and the brain, and I respect it so hard. But the thing I love about it is that it is problem solving and invention, right? You come in and you've imagined this whole thing in your brain, and then when you arrive on set, your job, or in prep, not on set, because at this point you should have already addressed a lot of this. But when you're for prep, it's your job as the writer to like set aside how you envisioned it and be like, okay, how can I work with what we have access to? And what battles are worth fighting? What do we absolutely 100% need to have and see in order to tell this story, and to tell this story to the quality level that both your boss, the studio, the network, and yourself creatively expect for the material? But then also, like, what are not fighting points, and what can I let go of and like move away from, or pitch something more affordable or more economical, or even cut in order to make this feasible to shoot and make.
Yeah, unbelievable advice, I think, across the board. I think anyone who's, even if you're venturing out as a filmmaker, as a writer director in the independent space, I think thinking about things in that way, truly being collaborative, is the name of the game, and it's remembering that this all started from ideas on a page, and now a bunch of people have come together to execute and manifest that, and everyone is rowing in the same direction, generally speaking. And when you're the leader in some way of that conversation or of that vision, it is your job to lead people towards solutions and not be difficult with and precious about every single aspect. But again, there is that fine line of like, you have to know what is worth fighting for and what is going to make the difference. But then just being a kind person in the process, which sounds easier said than done, but yet we still hear horror stories of bad behavior and egotistical people that keep getting opportunities to create. But I think the way we make this vast change is by everyone who's coming up and now has power to be that person and model that, so that others see that in real time and go, oh, I can be that way. This is what's possible. I don't have to be whatever Entourage showed me, or whatever was maybe the way of leadership 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I want to dive a little bit into this idea of development, because we talked about developing and producing in the earliest stages, putting all of the elements, and what you're doing now, which in this deal, you're finding your IP, you're building out sales decks. There's this really producerial aspect and truly entrepreneurial aspect that nowadays you have to have as a creative of any type to sell, and to understand that, there's ideas you may love, but you have to find a way to marry your loves with what's going to sell in the marketplace to be sustainable and to have deadline articles written about you. So take us through that journey.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to address it from two places. For those of you who are writers, the word sales feels dirty, right? It's like, ugh, sales. And you might hate pitching. And for the writers who are listening, just know this is the next step in your career. If you want to be a showrunner, and by the way, going back to your question earlier about the North Star, you don't have to be a showrunner. You don't have to be in charge. If you are happy writing and just being on staff and supporting other people's vision, that's great too. And there's a very sustainable career path for you, not having to take on all of the leadership and the, difficult conversations and the management that is required as a showrunner. A-okay, totally fine. If you want to have your own shows, though, if you want your voice to be the central voice, and if you want to have the creative drive and control of that showrunner position, you have to get down with pitching. You just have to get zen with it. You have to know that it's performative, that there's going to be the development hell, as they call it. You're just going to go through the grind and just get zen that this is part of the process of Hollywood and of making television, and you just have to learn how to navigate it. So I took out my first piece of development when I was a very baby writer, like probably too green, but I didn't really have a choice because I couldn't get staffed and I needed to make money. So I took out my first piece of development, and it just started off as a pitch that I just pitched around everywhere. And it kind of taught me that pitching is like a video game where you're just trying to get us like boop, boop, beep, beep, boop, boop reaction from the person on the other side, right? Like what gets you excited? Oh, you're excited. Okay, let me lean in. I'm like pitching more. And then after each pitch, I would adjust and rewrite the pitch to like hone in on the areas where I was seeing excitement from the buyers or potential, partners, and then culling away the elements that weren't exciting or were dragging. And so it's a constant calibration of just like building out a sales tool, because that's what it is. And what
Yeah.
goes in the pitch probably won't be what the show ends up being. A lot of it. A lot of it will either get thrown away or will get modified. Like what you pitch may not even end up being what the pilot script becomes. So you kind of just have to think of it as what can I describe about the tone and the world and the characters that I feel passionate about that's going to get someone else passionate and psyched to throw down some money for it. So that's like the broad overview of development. Now what I'm finding is that in the era of Zoom and technology, you're also as a writer and as a producer being expected to bring in extensive visual materials. And this is new. This is only within the past 5 years, I would say, that there's this expectation that everything comes with a deck or everything comes with some sort of sizzle reel. And that's where I'm finding a lot of the producing to be happening now, where even before we have a full pitch, we have a soft deck that we're sharing with a potential, producer partner or someone being like, here's the really high level overview of what this thing could be. Now let's dig in and do the nitty gritty of building out the pitch and whatever additional visual materials are going to sell this damn thing.
Interesting. So it's like instead of having the product already fully formed, it's like you're in prototype beta phase, seeing who wants to bite. But like to even get to the phase of going into manufacturing, I don't know this metaphor
Yeah.
that just came to me, but like you have to sell it enough with the right elements and with the package that enough people will go, okay, you have all the right elements that we think this is worth exploring for manufacturing, because the risks have gotten, the risk taking have gotten even higher, and people are more trepidatious than they've ever been. And so it feels like it's almost like you have to jump through more hoops just to even get to the starting line,
Yeah.
you know?
And 100%. And I think another way I try to, think about it or recontextualize it for my brain is just it needs to be undeniable. And how can you make it undeniable in a
Mm-hmm.
landscape that is so crowded, where there's so many people who are pitching and bringing out projects, and there's a million pieces of IP and books and products that could be converted into some sort of property? How do you make yours stand out, and how do you make it undeniable? And I'm surprised that there's so much early attachment. You're seeing actors attaching to pitches, you're seeing directors attaching to pitches. And, there's a lot of packaging happening at the very earliest stages. And I do think that's a lot easier to do when you're someone like, me, who has more of a track record. It's like, okay, if you want to know what I've done, you can go watch Jace Jones, you can go watch The Boys. When you're a greener writer or you're a newer writer coming up, you really have to have that spec or, super powerful partner producers who are going to be that, going to advocate for the project in order to get, those name auspices attached.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm seeing more and more of that too, but it's like we always talk, this word undeniable comes up a lot and it means different things to different people. But then sometimes I'm like, you watch what gets made and you're like, where did they lose the thread of undeniable? Where in the process
Oh my
did
gosh.
we, right? Like, well, we won't
Yeah.
name names, but there's just a lot of stuff that you're like, huh, in a sea of such competition and less things getting through the pipeline, how did this get through? And
Yeah.
it's depressing but also inspiring all in one somehow. Where you're like, well,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
they could do it, well, all right, we just keep going. It's really interesting. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that is a good encapsulation of sort of this moment that we're in right now, and hopefully with some great markets, especially on the film side and TV side. But like, we see sort of a rebound of taking more risks and giving people more opportunity
One
as
of
we
the
continue. Yeah.
Sorry, one of the things that I would just love to share as a piece of advice that I'm thinking about from both the writer producer point of view is that I've been intentionally back engineering, or at least thinking about reverse engineering projects for specific buyers, because you kind of know you're going to take it out everywhere, but you kind of know where it's going to land. And so, especially before I was under the deal, I was like, okay, if this feels to me like it's a Hulu project, let me look at the Hulu pods that we might, or the ABC Fox pods that we might target to go to Hulu. How can I make this project a fit for a producer there? Like, and just really being conscientious about, calibrating the tones of the pitches to be really targeted at the home that I would ideally like them to land at.
Yeah. I mean, that's really smart advice. And certainly I think it takes someone at your level to even like have access to that information and know who's got deals at pods. I think a lot of people listening may be like a lot of this information is so gate kept for a reason. And so a lot of people may not know, but I think even if you don't have that accessible to you, I think you can look again at like, I always talk about intentionality, right? And nobody wants to do that kind of tedious homework because it takes so long. But if you
Yes.
know you want to do X, if you know your North Star is I want to make a show with Greg Daniels, then like go look at every single thing that that person has developed and produced and excited about. Watch every podcast, everything you can get your hands on, and really craft something specific. Don't put all your energy in the one basket, but that is a way to teach you to really navigate things from a place of intentionality. And as you do all of that homework, you get faster and faster and better every time at picking
Yes.
up all the elements that you need so that you can be ahead of the game versus that broad approach we always talk about that no one really wants. No one wants to feel like you're just cold emailing or cold, you know what I mean? Like you're just one in a sea of many. Everyone wants to feel special. Everyone wants to feel like you took the time and that this is the thing that is right for them for these reasons. It's such simple, like, psychology 101, but I think in the desperation sometimes of getting going, getting started, people want to just go, but like as you've proven, it takes 10 years. It takes a long time to get to that place. And if you are taking the steps slowly and intentionally, it is just a matter of time until everything aligns for you. But if you're trying to jump ahead and you're trying to skip parts of the process, your journey will reflect that, and the
Yeah.
kinds of people that you're going to find along your journey will also reflect that. And so it's the question is what kind of journey, and I said that word 3 times, but like what journey do you want to go on? You know, I worked for Bob Odenkirk, my very first survival job, and one of the things he would always say is he would say, who are you going to be in the meantime, because it takes so long. And if you get where you're going but then in your meantime you've become a miserable person, you haven't done the work, or you're just looking for shortcuts, like even if you get there, you're not going to have a good experience and no one's going to want to work with you because, like we talked about, people just want to work with good people that they respond to. And if you don't become one of those people, you're going to have a short lifespan in the business. And so the more you can think about this for yourself and take the time to study and learn, and I think the better off you'll be and the further ahead you'll come out in the long run, you know? So,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I guess the last thing I would just say on that too, because I love everything you just said, and I just want to underscore too, you can't let Hollywood be your say all end all. Like I believe powerfully in hobbies and interests and creativity outside of Hollywood. And I think it fuels your ability to come back in and hit the grind again. Like, and I have a million oddball random hobbies. I sell jewelry to my friends online and collect vintage jewelry, and we have dogs, and we're always involved in dog rescue stuff. And like, I mean, there's just not a hobby I haven't picked up. Yoga and, spin and like all of these things.
Pottery.
Not yet, not yet, but I
Okay,
have
well, that's next.
tarot card reading. I mean, really, all. You have to
Yeah.
have interests in a life outside of Hollywood. Otherwise, this will become all consuming in a toxic, negative way. And you won't have anything to express. You won't have
Yeah.
anything fresh or new or novel to channel into your work. Like you constantly need to be refueling. I think about all the great showrunners who've talked about, when your well is dry, refilling the well with not just other movies and TV and film, but experiences.
Yeah. Which brings me to this next topic that we'll dive into briefly, but the challenges, the mental health components, the undulations, the ups and downs, the hills and the sort of lulls that we all experience if you've been here long enough. And I'm curious how you've navigated some of this stuff, how you've been able to stay grounded in yourself and not get lost in some of the BS that this industry can be, because it can be very toxic, self-comparison, all of that stuff that we know. And I think anyone that has been here as long as we have has clearly found some way to withstand this and still have places where we can go to fill our wells and people and communities that bring us some sense of belonging without it being tethered to success and perception of success. And so how has that been for you?
I love that. And you mentioned this. You mentioned this when we were emailing about La Lista. And so I do want to say,
Yeah.
A, let's start with A, finding communities, finding spaces of people who can be there for you, who can be your allies, who can be your mentors, who can support you through the hard times is absolutely necessary. About 15 years ago, Diana Mendez, who is a dear friend of mine who did the National Hispanic Media Coalition Fellowship with me, she said, I want to create a community for Latina TV writers for us to be able to be in a safe space and, support each other and be there for each other. And I was like, great, I'm happy to help. And so we created La Lista, the Latina TV Writers Brunch Group. If you go to lalistatv.com, it'll take you to our website. We now have a searchable database that has every single one of our members. When we started the group, it was 15 women in Gloria Calderon-Kellett's backyard. We're now close to 200 women.
That's amazing.
Which is testament to and I mean, look, in some ways, there's a negative lens where you could be like, oh my gosh, there's only 200 working Latina TV writers in Hollywood. Like, that's harsh. But there were only 15, like 10, 15 years ago. So there's been exponential growth, which I find really exciting. And I see the growth continuing. And so I do see the change. I always wish it was faster and there was more, but I'll take what I can get. And this group has just been such a lifesaver on so many instances. Literally yesterday, emails were going out where someone was like, hey, does anyone have this pilot script that I can use as an example? Or do you have a sample comedy pitch that I might be able to read so I can figure out how I'm like retooling my pitch? Or just celebrating our wins. One of our members, Cherise Castro-Smith, just had a really great announcement of a project she's doing. And so we were just like, today, emails popping around today, just like singing her praises and sending her flowers for her success. So find that community. And if you can't find it, then create it. It's very easy to grab a group of people, but be intentional about the people you bring into your space. Because if you surround yourself with folks who are going to be down and dire about the industry, you're going to be down and dire about the industry. And it's just not beneficial. It's just not beneficial to you to like approach it with a place of negativity, because it is hard. We all know it's hard. It's impossible. It's like playing the lottery. It's all of those things. But at the end of the day, like thinking about how hard it is and the challenges of it isn't going to make it any easier for you to attack it. You just have to approach it with your passion and enthusiasm for whatever the heck it is you're doing. Whatever weirdo, oddball, strange, special, heartbreaking, tragic story you want to tell, you just have to like hit it with renewed enthusiasm every day, because, everyone else is going to tell you no. Don't be the one that's telling you no.
Yes, that's the quote right there. Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. And I think you were one of the first people, honestly, when I first was looking for that community early on, especially within the Latino space, that brought me in and embraced me and introduced me to so many people. You've given so much, like every time you would post on social media, you're always volunteering or mentoring or doing something for some organization that's either upholding our community or women. And I really respect and admire that about you, because like you are so busy and you have so much going on, but it seems like creating space for that in your life is a non-negotiable too. And I think it's part of what is the magic of you and where you are today and the kinds of people that you've attracted in your orbit, because it is about like the more you give back and the more you can reach behind you and bring more people into the fold, like eventually the 200 will duplicate, hopefully, and we'll be at 400. And this is how change happens. It's slow and steady, but it takes that enthusiasm by a group of people who are not delusional, like you said, about how hard it is, but they see it and they put it aside and they focus on what is in their control and what is positive, and really helping each other, because that's ultimately all we have, when we're all dead and gone and all these projects just live for others to discover. No one's going to know all of the stories and all of the things that had to happen to get there. I mean, some people will know, because hopefully this podcast will still be listened to in 100 years.
No, but it's a really testament to like, I think I really believe in the importance of networking, and not in the dirty way of networking, where you build connections and relationships that are not about what you can get out of it, right? It's just, we're here to support each other and we are friends. And at some point, maybe you'll be able to do me a favor. Maybe I'll be able to do you a favor. Maybe we're going to lift each other up. But like, let's just start this connection on just like, let's just be allies, and like, let me look out for you and you look out for me. And then we'll worry about the like, how you can help me get my script in front of whomever or whatever it is. And a lot of my success over the past, I would say for sure, 5 to 7 years has come from these relationships that I built 10 years ago that are now have been developed and grown, and we have these close ties, and they know me and they know my work and they know my voice. And now they've been able to advocate for me. Gloria Calderon-Kellett, like did ask nothing of her for 15 years. I've known her for 15 years. I asked nothing of her. I was like, you're doing you. I'm on the Flash. And then when I was available, she was like, are you interested in coming to work on the horror of Dolores Roach? And I listened to it and I was like, Gloria, this is me. This is me to a T. I absolutely am dying to do this. And so it was just the time invested over a period of time in what is genuine friendship, not just like networking friendship.
Right. Surface Hollywood friendship. Yeah. Again, time. It takes time. And if you're in a rush, you're going to reap what you sow, right? So take inventory of what you're planting and what you're reaping, and also, more importantly, who you are becoming in that process. Do people want to be around you? Do people want to work with you? Like, I think that's where like the therapy and the psychology really comes into it all. Like, that is the fundamental most important thing, because we are assuming you have the skill set, you have the talent, you're going to nurture that and figure that out. But if you're not a person that people want to be around, it doesn't really matter for the most part. There are always outliers, sure. But again, what is the life that you want to create? Who do you want to be in the process? Okay, so I actually want to take us to the lightning round, because we could talk forever, and maybe we should just start a Twitch channel where we just talk forever. But I want to take us to the lightning round and then have some time for our Patreon exclusive, where we're going to dissect a producing challenge you had on The Flash and how you navigated that. So thank you for being on the show and for sharing just a little bit. As you can see, there's like a million more that we could go into, but just this little nugget and just sharing your journey and your wisdom with listeners is really what helps most people listening stay the course and feel compelled to fight the fight and show up for themselves in this challenging but rewarding landscape. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's the lightning round. What's a song that teleports you to a happy place?
Oh my gosh. Oh. You're going to have to edit me.
It's fine. Everyone does this, but it's fun. If I tell you ahead of time, then I feel like, I don't know, you lose the magic.
Okay, Florence and the Machine, Dog Days Are Over.
What is the latest piece of art that has moved you? It can be a book, a film, a show, anything.
Poor Things, like, just got to me. It got to me. Like, I did not think that I was going to connect so much with Emma Stone as this kind of Frankenstein-esque woman, but her journey and the repression of society and patriarchy and then just resisting it, I just loved it.
Beautiful. I know. Same. Fill in the blank. When I'm overworked, blank helps ease the stress.
McDonald's.
What is one of the most worthwhile investments you've ever made? And it doesn't have to be financial.
This is a very honest response. I invested in ketamine treatments 2 years ago, and drugs are not the solution to everything, but I really was interested in the kind of results you're seeing for depression and anxiety with ketamine and psychedelics. And it has been such an eye-opening and raw and emotional experience in a way that I still sing the praises of. I'm not going to say what company I did it with because I don't want to be a walking advertisement, but you can speak with your psychiatrist, you can do some research on it. It really allowed me to tap into this deep unconscious part of my creativity and express it in a visual way that I'm channeling into my work, and that is just really making me think about the meaning of life and my place in the world and my own mortality, but in a positive way, like the amount of time I have on this earth and how I use it and what I do with it.
I will be sidebarring you to talk more about this. Amazing. This is the final question. What is one question you have for the next producer who comes on the show? We don't know who it's going to be yet. And then after you answer, I have a piece of advice that the last podcast guest left for you.
Okay. For the next producer, I would love to ask, what do you do to re-inspire yourself when you're feeling uninspired?
Okay, perfect. And this little bit of advice comes from Cynthia Erivo, who was just on the podcast. And she said to check in with yourself and find out what you need physically to keep yourself alert, ready, and happy. That was her piece of advice she wanted to impart on the next producer by the one and only Cynthia Erivo.
It's almost like she knows that I have not been on my Peloton in weeks and is saying, get back on your Peloton, girl.
Girl, it's a divine intervention to get you back on that Peloton. Here it is. Cynthia Erivo will be proud. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I loved this time together, and I can't wait to share all of this with everyone.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And thank you, listeners. And like, just keep strong. I know it's bananas sometimes, but it's worthwhile. The fight is worthwhile.
Yes, yes.